Hi everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we left off introducing Wroxeter, the Roman city in Shropshire, Viraconium as the Romans will have known it. Now, why was it important to the Roman Empire? Well, what you have to remember is that probably for centuries, the Romans would have been very well aware that there were tribes of people on the Isle of Britannia that had access to lots of resources: tin, copper, and most importantly for the Romans, lead. And there was plenty of lead in this area, and that is why they wanted to secure this for themselves. But also, there would have been timber. The whole area of Britain, the whole island, would have been essentially an ancient forest. Even though across Europe there would have been lots of ancient forests, you have to remember that the Roman Empire had advanced for several hundred years, and they will have chopped down quite a lot of it on their travels.
Did you chop down this tree?
No.
Who did it?
What's that?
I think he did it.
To get access to an island where there were still huge standing ancient oaks. An English oak was as prized then as it is now for its strength and durability. So that in itself would have been probably a main reason why they'd have wanted this island. Lead, timber, copper and tin. So I'd like to talk about Wroxeter's full name. Wroxeter, as we know it now, was called Viraconium Cornovium. I probably butchered that again, and I apologise, and I will put it on screen so you can see it. And that essentially translates to Viraconium of the Cornovii, a name that may have been transferred from the Wrekin Hill fort itself. Now, I think this is quite interesting, because what you have to remember is, and as we've said before, tribes and areas that didn't yield to the Romans were essentially taken over and massacred. And the fact that there's no pitched battle in this area, I think it's safe to say that we did yield in this area somewhat. And also, I'd like to point out that the fact that the Romans named Wroxeter and also included the name of the tribe, they gave the tribe some ownership over this new town, this new city that they created. And I imagine that's because the Romans thought that they could work with the Cornovii tribe.
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
My father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract.
And that's probably why you see a shift from people living on the hill fort at the Wrekin and moving down into Wroxeter itself. The Celtic Cornovii essentially became Romano British. They embraced Roman culture and they moved in. And I think you can see this from, as touching back on it, the battle with Boudicca. To fight Boudicca, the Romans left Wroxeter and fought Boudicca on Watling Street, somewhere between, it's believed, Wroxeter and Warwickshire, maybe the fort at Mansetta, but no one really knows. And I think the fact that you have a hill fort that's abandoned, a new Roman city that's created, you have the new Roman city that has been named after the tribe that used to be there, I think it's safe to say that the Romans, they felt pretty safe in this area. They felt like they could work with the Cornovii, and I imagine they didn't feel too threatened by them. Whereas in other areas of the country, we know they've built massive fortifications to keep people out, or in some cases to keep people in, like Hadrian's Wall.
Shite being Scottish! We're the lowest of the low! The scum of the fucking earth! The most wretched, miserable, servile, pathetic trash that was ever shot into civilization! Some people hate the English, I don't! They're just wankers! We, on the other hand, are colonised by wankers! Can't even find a decent culture to be colonised by! We're ruled by effete arseholes! It's a shite state of affairs to be in, Tommy, and all the fresh air in the world won't make any fucking difference!
Around here, it doesn't seem to be so much. It seems to be a lot more of a work together. We'll work with the people we've conquered, rather than just conquer them. And I think there's more evidence of this for when the Romans moved further north up to Diva, Chester as we know it now, because again, they essentially left the Cornovii tribe to their own devices. Okay, Wroxeter was fortified, of course it was. There would have been an army presence here, but not as much as other areas that we've seen. It seems like the Romans felt quite happy, maybe even to leave their families, people behind at Wroxeter while they went off adventuring further around the country. And the fact that they're leaving essentially a British tribe to run the area as they see fit, essentially, as long as they follow, let's say, some Roman rules and then pay their taxes. I think it speaks volumes to the fact that the Romans did feel reasonably safe in this area. Now that we've mentioned Diva, as we now know it, Chester, it's worth pointing out that the site where I believe there may be a Roman temple on Watling Street in St George's, just up the road from there on Red Hill, which we've mentioned before, that was one of the forts that was 11 miles out from Roxeter. And that's pretty important, actually, because having a fort that was 11 miles away from a main town or a city, it was half a day's march. They were safe spots. It meant that people could travel and they could quickly nip into a fort for sanctuary, refuge, spend the night, get supplies, and then move on. And it was very important. It also helped the Romans resupply in times of need, war, and everything else. If you walk from Roxeter to today and you follow Watling Street, after 11 miles, you would come to the site at Red Hill. And that site was known in Roman times as Yuxaconia. Yuxaconia is a name that pops up in Telford. You'll notice there's a couple of streets, and I think there's even an industrial estate called Yuxaconia Way. And that's because it's named after the Roman fort at Red Hill. Now, as we've mentioned, these forts were strategically important for the Romans. They were essentially one of the key parts as to how they were able to conquer so far and so wide. There's an old saying, all roads lead to Rome, and all those roads were backed up every 11 miles by some kind of fort or settlement. So there was always a place to advance to and always a place to retreat to. Now, going back to the temple situation, I know a lot of people have said, well, temples wouldn't have been outside a fort. Well, I'm just going to give you a few examples. At Burnwell, the Roman temple is a temple dedicated to, and I'm going to get this wrong again, Ananocius. I'll pop that up on screen so you can see for yourself. A local god, and this was quite normal, actually. The Romans, just like the Christians at a later day, they would use local gods and they would merge the two together because they wanted people to come into the Roman Empire and be Romanized. And you could well have a situation near Red Hill where an old Celtic temple was possibly turned into a Roman temple just 1 mile outside the fort on the road between Roxeter and Yuxaconia. So there are plenty of examples, and there's more. I could sit here for the next 10 minutes and give you so many examples of Roman temples that were either pre-Roman and then turned into Roman temples, or were built solely as Roman temples on the outsides of forts and towns for essentially travellers to pop in when they were moving around Roman Britain. And again, I'll repeat the same information I gave in the last video. At its peak, the Roman settlement at Roxeter was estimated to have 15,000 people. And for context, Londinium, London as we know it now, had between 30 and 60,000 people. That made Roxeter in this area a major player in Roman Britain. Not just for the resources, the fact that there was a large city there. So it is well within the realms of possibility that there were several Roman temples outside forts and cities and towns in this area of the Cornovii tribe because the Romans felt safe. The Romans clearly felt safe in this area compared to other areas of Britain, and I don't think they feared any reprisals from the local population. It seems to be the case that the local population were quite happy to get involved in the new Roman way of life. And just to reiterate my point of why I believe the Romans felt safe in this area, it's mainly down to the fact that there isn't evidence yet of mass graves or massive pitched battles, and it does look like it was a fairly peaceful transition from Celtic Cornovii tribe into the Romano British era in this area. There are several examples of massacres at hill forts during the Roman conquest of Britain, including at Fincop, Ham Hill and Burnswalk. In 2011, archaeologists found the remains of women, children and teenage male in a ditch around the Iron Age hill fort at Fincop in Derbyshire. The massacre was likely a result of the fort being captured in the early conquest of Britain. Researchers found evidence that thousands of people were slaughtered and dismembered at Ham Hill, Britain's largest Iron Age hill fort. So in case you didn't know this, but I'm sure you did, the Romans were not adverse to massacring people, men, women, children, in the hundreds, in the thousands, in the tens of thousands. Basically, you either bent to their will or you got massacred. So again, going over the same points, The fact that we don't have that evidence here, the fact that no one's found it around the Wrekin, and the fact that we have a big Roman city being built and the tribe being left to their own devices on at least 2 occasions to basically run the area as they see fit, suggests to me that we were thick and thieves with the Romans. We were in it. We were in the club and we were happy. Well, as far as we know. Yeah, so if you're lucky enough to walk from Wroxeter to Redhill, you'll come to a town called Oakengates. And that's Oakengates, not Open Gates, and we'll cover that name when we get onto the Saxon era of this area. But yes, once you get to Oakengates, if you walk under the railway bridge, and you'll get to a subway on the left-hand side, with the path to Redhill leading straight ahead of you right up the town. If you look down at your feet near the subway, you can actually see the cobbles of the Roman road. Yes, the council very, very nicely exposed them when they did some town developments a few years ago, and there's a small area of Roman road that you can actually touch and feel and stand on. And this shows you again how important this area was to the Roman Empire, and how, although over time we've forgotten this, that this area of Oakengates, Ketley, St George's, all the way through from Wroxeter all the way up to Chester, was a very important road and a strategic, important position for the Romans. And if you're a local, and if you haven't been to Oakengates for some time, or if you just pop into this area, I highly recommend popping into Oakengates just to check out this bit of road. I think it's incredibly cool. I always have a crafty walk on it. I like to feel like I'm walking in the footsteps of my ancestors. So yeah, if you're this way, please check it out. Hopefully now we've covered why this area was important to the Romans. We've covered a little bit about the Wrekin. We've covered a little bit about Wroxeter. We've gone on to Yuxoconia, the fort at Redhill, not far from where I believe there may be a temple. And we've covered how the road followed all the way up to Chester, which we know ended up being a very large Roman city. But there's a couple of interesting things. Obviously, we touched on the name Viraconium and how the full name Viraconium Cornovarum, Viraconium of the Cornovii. Well, there's another little thing that's quite interesting, and this will make more sense in a few videos' time when we get to the Saxon element. The name of the settlement, meaning Viraconium of the Cornovans, preserves the native Brittonic name that has been reconstructed as Euriconian. And again, I'll put that on screen. The city of the Euricu. And Euricu basically means man-wolf. Yes, this is believed to have been a masculine given name, essentially meaning werewolf. So it's quite interesting that the Romans called Wroxeter Viraconium Cornovium after the tribe that was here. But Viraconium essentially means werewolf. Now, there would have been wolves in this area, and this would have been new, ancient, wild woodland for the Romans. Some of the people in the army might not have seen woodland this wild before. If they'd come from Europe, where there'd been a lot of activity over hundreds of years and they'd seen woodlands decimated, this could have been very wild. This could have been literally taking you back thousands of years that a lot of people in the Roman army would not have seen unless they'd have gone further afield into the north or into the east. Having this wild forest with probably wolves and bears roaming around, what did the Romans think of it? The mythology around it. Is this where the name comes from, man-wolf? Were the tribe at the time, were they obsessed with wolves? Were they wearing wolf furs? Were carvings and artwork and in this area dedicated to wolves? We will probably never know. But it's interesting because it raises its head again in the Saxon times. And it just gets you thinking about this local storytelling and how it transcends from generation to generation over the millennia, that the Romans mentioned wolves and werewolves when they got to this area. And oddly, so did the Saxons.